So we're very, very truly honored today to be joined by an incredible individual, an essential voice for justice, peace, and dignity in the Arab region and across the world, Dr. Hanan Ashrawi. Thank you for being with us today, Dr. Hanan.
My pleasure, Hibaaq.
We never say even Dr. Everyone else calls you Dr. Ashrawi, but for us you are Hanan.
Yeah, please call me Hanan. It's much easier and much more intimate. Thank you.
We are so grateful for you being with us today, and we are especially excited that you will be sharing the insight from your experience with a young activist from right across the Arab region. And also we have some African young women in the audience also who will, of course, would like to give some questions. And what experience you have to reflect on a scholar, negotiator, a politician, a minister, and throughout of all your work, Palestinian people and activists. We are very lucky to be speaking today with a woman who has been the first to break down the barriers into spaces that were previously the sole preserve of men. We are still in a world of firsts for women, and we want to learn how we can move beyond that to where the global political agenda truly reflects the priorities of women and the whole community. We are all brought here today by a shared conviction in the power of activism and exploring what motivates, drives the most inspiring women activists working today. It is very interesting to contrast your experience with our last guest who spoke of only finding activism and politics when she was there. That is not a luxury that is afforded to Palestinians. And Dr. Hanan, I'm extremely lucky today to be in a position to be talking to you and be asking you the first. This is one of the few times that I'm going to really have, be a dictator. But I just want to tell you, once upon a time, I was a young woman watching Nightline and watching this incredible, you were the first woman in this region or in Africa I have seen, talking in the most articulate way about justice and, and Palestine. But then I thought that you were speaking for all the women and for all the injustices. And I was so proud of you. And I was a young woman from Somalia, and I really have admired you from that time. And it was like 100 years. But honest to God, at that time, I didn't know you actually had a role model. I thought the only role model was your grandmother, who was oppressed and who oppressed you too. And to be, that was it. But honest to God, I mean, you were the first woman that I thought, oh my God, she's inspiring me in a different way. So I am so happy that you really, that I can talk to you today. I'm very honored that you are here. And I'd like to ask you the first question. I think it's fair to say that as a Palestinian, you don't find politics, but politics finds you. Dr. Hanan, when did you become an activist? This is just a question that I want to put out there.
Okay, well, maybe I was an activist without knowing it throughout my life, because I was raised in a house that had a lot of activism. It was right after I was born, at the same time as the as the Nakba. So I was raised in Ramallah, even though in 48 my parents were in Tiberias. So in many ways, this was part of my upbringing, although my parents tried to shield us. But I wrote about this once. My father took me out to the veranda, to the western balcony, and he said, you see, we could see the Mediterranean from there. And he said, that used to be Palestine, and the Israelis took it, and it became Israel. Now I'm convinced that the Israelis will extend and will come over to the West Bank and to the rest of Palestine. So that began my thinking. But then the real activism began when I went to university in Beirut, at the American University of Beirut. And for the first time, I went beyond this shielded childhood, and I volunteered to work in refugee camps. And I saw the sheer misery and deprivation of Palestinians in refugee camps, the fact that they had no protection whatsoever. They were extremely vulnerable. And I started working also with the women in the refugee camps. And I started getting books, and we started having political sessions and so on. But then in 1968, I ran for the General Union of Palestine Students. I was the first undergraduate co-ed who ran for the General Union, and I became an active member. And I attended the conference, the international conference in Amman, and that began an ongoing process. But as you said, Hibaaq, Palestinians often don't have the luxury of a choice. You are born with a historical burden. You are born in a situation and a context that attempts to define you and restrict you and limit your abilities and limit your freedom in every possible way. And you can either choose to be a passive victim, or you can decide to stand up to the injustices that you are living and witnessing. And so in many ways, I decided to stand up to the injustices, and I decided to, as I said, you could die as a passive victim, or you could take chances and you could fight the injustices and oppression to which you are subjected. And that's why I began, but as a student, as you know, and I continued in a variety of ways. When I went to the States, I started American Friends of Free Palestine. I started working with even the Black Students Alliance, the Appalachian mine workers. And it was the first time I was exposed to an organized women's movement in the States, in Virginia. And so I got the intersectionality, I got the sort of cohesive knowledge of different types of oppression emanating from the same mentality, from the same discriminatory approach to life, from the assumption of superiority and so on, to a sense of entitlement and the fact that you can oppress others with impunity. And that's why I linked the Palestinian struggle to the struggle for self-determination, and women's struggle to the struggle for self-determination. And the fact that we in Palestine, both as a nation, were subject to multiple injustices, either under occupation or under an apartheid system again, or in exile and in a state of dispossession. Palestinians suffered multiple injustices, but at the same time in our society, we had a society that was basically traditional, male-dominated, of course, patriarchal. And so we felt we had another challenge, which is how do we again link up self-determination for women and for a nation at the same time? And how do we work on not just reform, but on challenging all those patterns and stereotypical attitudes and attempts at excluding and marginalizing women at the same time as we were fighting the Israeli occupation with all its multifaceted injustices. So I can't give you my whole history. It's a long, long history, but I worked with students, I worked with women, I worked with prisoners, I had the committee to defend prisoners, legal aid committee, and so on. And I moved in many different roles, but the commitment to Palestine and, of course, to gender issues went hand in hand.
Absolutely. I want to ask you one more question quickly. You have served as a number of roles in Palestinian public life. You have been elected to the Palestinian Legislative Council. You have served as a minister in the Palestinian Authority and the executive board of the PLO. I really want to ask you, and this will be my last question. Did you ever feel you were treated differently because you were a woman? When did you feel? How did it feel like? And how did you overcome that?
Yeah, of course, you're always treated differently as a woman. You are always measured by more stringent standards. Quite a few men feel threatened, and they feel that if you're in a position of decision-making, you're taking away their power or something that belongs to them. And in our society, of course, particularly after the signing of agreements and so on, there was a mad scramble, a lot of competition for positions. As you know, women were told that they were active and they were defiant and they launched the intifada and so on. But now it's the time for men to take over. So I felt the attempt at relegating women, as you know, to go back to the kitchen, as a conscious attempt in some ways, and an attempt at reinstating these traditional attitudes to women. It was okay for women to take risks. It was okay for women to be shot at, to be beaten up, to be imprisoned, to be killed, and so on, as we all, you know, suffered different types of physical violence and so on. But now is the time to fill the political positions with men. Anyway, every position I had, I was elected to. I made sure I was elected, whether to from the Students' Union all the way to the executive committee of the PLO, because I believe that legitimacy comes from the ballot box, from being elected, from having a constituency. And that gave me confidence. And also as an independent, I was much more exposed, as you know, because I didn't hide behind my party or my faction. But it also gave me strength that I could speak out, I could speak my mind. I wasn't restricted. This is something I learned as a child when my father told me, don't accept any limits. Don't accept any constraints on your behavior, because we don't put constraints on you. Don't accept any externally imposed constraints. My father was a feminist. We can talk about that later. So I had the advantage of being raised by feminist parents. So that was very important to me. But the last thing is, when I ran, I never wanted to take public office, very frankly. I established civil society institutions. I felt I belonged in civil society, whether the Independent Commission for Human Rights or Miftah, which is, again, close to my heart, or whether it is the Aman, the Coalition for Accountability and Integrity and Anti-Corruption Coalition. So these three, I consider them my babies, because I established them and I felt that's where I belong. But at the same time, I felt I had to run for the Legislative Council, because I wanted women and active women to run, and also independents to run. It's very important. And I always worked with other women. I always worked within the collective of women. And the last position, I never wanted, but as usual with the PLO, they decided that they're going to have there was a meeting to choose to fill the vacancies, and the PLO 6 had died. It was a very geriatric system anyway. And so they met, and all the heads of factions met and decided on several men, on 6 men. And they came and they told us, here are the names we chose, and by default, you have to accept them. So the women mutinied. I always use this story because the women from different factions refused. And they said, no, we want women, and we will present our own woman candidate on behalf of the General Union and the women, and we want elections. We want to elect our representatives. So they forced elections and they forced a woman. So when they came to me and asked me to run on behalf of the women as a consensus candidate for the women, I couldn't say no. This was the greatest vote of support you can get. And the women wanted to impose themselves on the agenda and to be there. And they said, we want to win this battle with you, because you've proven yourself, you're there. They cannot tell us you're not qualified. And as you know, women have to be superwomen to be qualified. So I agreed, I accepted, and I ran, and the women voted for me. Otherwise, I would never have won. And I said that goes to debunk the myth that women do not vote for other women. when they decide to work together, we can make a difference and we can change. That's why I'm in the PLO executive, not because I wanted to be, but because I accepted to be the instrument through which the women entered the political arena at the highest level.
This is very powerful. Women should really take a lesson from that, that you have to be elected, believe in the ballot box, and then you will be taken very seriously. Now I'm delighted to bring in our panel of brilliant young women activists into the discussion. We are especially happy to be welcoming a number of amazing young Palestinian women and women from the other parts in the region. Amani Aruri will be the first speaker who is remarkable activist in Palestine, and she has been appointed to the Beijing 25 Global Task Force as a young ambassador. Amani?
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Actually, I feel speechless now after I heard Dr. Hanan, what she was saying. And I would like to share with her some points that I also had felt before, especially when we talk about like options. What options do Palestinians have? And when it comes to women, this matters. Like it even becomes more difficult, because I've been asked this question before, and like people ask me, and especially in the international community, like, how did you decide, or how did you become an activist? And I've always said that it's not a choice that I've ever made in my life. I've never expected to become an activist or to be outspoken. But it's not also because someone supported me, because as a Palestinian young woman and talking about intersectionality, it's really difficult. It's really hard to be a Palestinian woman and young in this patriarchal society and under Israeli occupation, where we don't even have access to our basic human rights, not as women, but also as human beings. So I always like say that, I just found myself struggling as a human being and as a woman. And I didn't have any choice rather than speaking out and demanding my rights and the rights of other Palestinian women and women in the world, because we as women, we share the struggle. We are excluded, we are marginalized, we are perceived as like not only vulnerable but also victims, while we are not only, women are not only victims, they are capable of changing the world, of leading the battles, and of course fighting for the liberty of their nations. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story, Dr. Hanan. And talking about the intersectionality, it came to my mind that, like, the issue of the exclusion of young women. It's true that, women back in the time, the Intifada, and how they led the struggle and Intifada, and they took an active role, of course, and they did not receive recognition for their leadership of this national struggle, but they only received the exclusion afterwards, because male politicians, they wanted to take the position, and they just exposed women to the risks and threats. But now, like, comparing the time, like I didn't experience, like I wasn't born at the time of the first Intifada, but of course I've watched a lot of documentaries and I heard a lot from different women leaders. But comparing it to this time, I can tell that it's getting even more difficult for women to be engaged in the political work and to be recognized for their leadership and for their also sacrifices and hard work on ground. We are having an increase, like we are increasingly having anti-feminism and anti-women's rights movements that we are like struggling in encountering them. Like they are increasing not only from the society but also from the political leadership. And one example is an ongoing example. It's the family protection bill. Like we are being attacked as women, as feminists, as activists, only for demanding the protection of our rights. So this also puts another layer of oppression. Like we have multi-layered oppression from the Israelis, from the government, and from the society, which also perceive it as perceive the leadership as exclusive to men. So, do you see any hope of changing this status of women, especially in Palestine, as we are experiencing different layers of oppression? This is the first part. And the second thing I wanted to ask about or to share with you is the women political activists and political analysts. Like, we truly have many Palestinian women who are capable of like competing men and also taking the leadership, taking leadership roles and positions, but they are not exposed to the public. They are not present in the public sphere, and it's not only because they are they have barriers. It's not only because they are prevented from being there, but also because they don't feel safe. They are intimidated, they are attacked, they are threatened, and that's why they don't want to show up to the public. I wanted to ask about your opinion on this, like how this can be changed. Is there any way, like, is there something that we should do differently as women activists, as advocates, as, feminists, to change this perception? Thank you.
You want me to answer quickly? I'll try to be brief because this is a very important question and very relevant. Yes, I do think, Amani, things are becoming more difficult now. The more difficult they are politically and in terms of the struggle, the more restricted is the space and constricted is the space for women and for the young. I always have young women and young men working with me, and I bring to my office generally, and I try to train and support and give them a platform, people who are trying to get somewhere. And I try to give them the exposure and the training that they need. So I have quite a few who are working with me, and I feel that you always need to have mentors. You need to have women who are in positions of decision-making or power or ability to help you break through. I mean, when I was your age or younger, we were part of the student revolution that was all over the place. And then we were part of the Palestinian revolution and so on. And we felt we could change the world, not just Palestine. But now it's extremely cruel and extremely competitive, both for girls, for women, for young women, and for young men. I believe there is hope. Organization is very badly needed. I keep telling people it's not enough to mobilize on cyberspace. You have to organize on the ground. You have to be there and you have to challenge, and you have to present your own agenda. You have to come to the public space with confidence, with collectivity, with, as I said, intersectionality, connect all forms of oppression. This is multi-tiered, as you said, and be able to break through barriers. Use your allies. There are quite a few men. When I worked on the law, on the family protection bill, I made sure we had a town meeting with the four male members of the executive committee, because I wanted to commit the PLO and the executive committee to our view of women's protection and women's rights. So always use your allies among the men. There are enlightened men, and also use the women who have achieved positions and work within groups. A woman alone is vulnerable, is exposed, and she will be really attacked, and they will find all sorts of ways of limiting her abilities to challenge. But the only way is to challenge, and the only way is to mobilize on the ground, and is to organize in ways that would make a difference, and to enter the arena in different ways. You can enter through parties or factions if you want, or you can enter through women's struggle, or you can enter through the struggle of the youth, or you can become, an intern and start your work as I do. I have some wonderful young interns with whom I work, and always try to find ways and openings without accepting the limits that men impose on you. Never accept external limits. You set your own agenda. You cannot just say what you don't want. You always have to enter with a positive agenda of what you want and where you're heading, and that you have solutions. You're not just diagnosing the problems, but you are smart enough and you are capable enough to present solutions that others are incapable of doing. And heaven knows, right now we have so many problems and challenges. We need your abilities, we need your energy, we need your spirit, the spirit of the youth to be able to present solutions that the old, repetitive, regurgitated political discourse is incapable of presenting. And thank you for your activism. We need it very badly. And I'm there for you if you need me.
That's brilliant. And next speaker, and you only have 2 minutes, Emna, is Emna Mizouni. Emna is a truly brilliant digital rights activist who has done so much to record and promote the Tunisian culture and heritage online. Yeah. Emna, you have a very short time.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. So thank you, Karama and Hibaaq and the whole team. It's a dream that came true to me. Even if it's virtually to meet you, Dr. Hanan, it's heart-warming really to meet you in person and to learn a lot from you. And to emphasize everything that I learned actually throughout my experience. And I join you in saying like, we need to be in the ground and not only be organizing people in the cyberspace. And this is another part of my activism that I would say that is not really well known as like, yes, I love to work in the ground and I think it's the way to change things. And also a very good point that you mentioned, and I would love to hear more from you on this, about for every position that you occupied, you were elected. This is a very, very important point. We don't get to find women elected to positions that we want to. And here in Tunisia, although we're doing good in terms of like women parliamentarians, for example, we're still so behind in the government, for example. And also we have a very famous thing that is list fillers, because we pushed for a quota for women to be in elections lists. So we ended up with women just list fillers, not super women.
Just what, sorry?
List fillers. So
list fillers.
Exactly. So this drives me to the question, how women they are treated and welcomed and mentored to enter the decision-making process at all levels, not only in places that are like occupied territories or places in conflict, but also places that we need women to run the daily governance issues that are affecting women as well as citizens. And so how can they go through that struggle and not be list fillers, let's say? Not only list fillers, but also they have a very deserved position, and they drag in other women. It's very, very important when you said you were elected and you had constituency, how women can build that constituency in a very toxic masculine world. 1, 2, with all of the bullying and harassment women they go through, it's quite annoying to see that women, they withdraw from the civic space and political space as well. What would you say to those women that we're seeing a lot of them here in the call, but also are watching you definitely and would love to learn from you? And thank you so much again.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, let me say that you in Tunis have been pace setters in many ways. And I think that you were among the first to have constitutional rights for women and to include many of the secular aspects of women's rights that were not, where is Anne? I don't see her. that other constitutions and laws in the Arab world do not have. So we always looked up to Tunis and Tunisian women who were among the first to organize and to challenge. And as I said before, challenging is very important. Do not be intimidated, do not accept a position of secondary status or even of silence, because we always say, you're never silent, you are silenced. So don't accept to be silenced. And the use of volumes, the use of volume is generally a male approach to things, because metaphorically, again, when you speak, the man's voice is always more threatening, more intrusive, higher, louder volumes, and so on. So it is used against you to silence you, to intimidate you. And this kind of volume can be translated into action, not just in voice, but in action. Now, look, the affirmative action, I don't say quotas, I say affirmative action is very important because, as you know, it's not a level playing field. So you do need the laws in order to make room for women. I really believe in that. But then when they start forming lists, what you need to do is ensure that the women find their own candidates and impose them on the lists. Because otherwise they will find there are always yes people, whether they're women or men. And they will find people who will not upset the apple cart and who will go along with the dominant male. But if you work together, if you find your own candidates, as the women chose me to run on their behalf, you can choose women who are capable, whom you trust, who have the gender agenda, unlike Hillary Clinton, who ran as a woman and wanted to get the women's voices, but acted like a man when it came to power politics. So the thing is, you do need to be able to work with other women. You need to present your own candidates. Always prepare your candidates. I work with the media to always tell them to have women speak out and give them exposure. As you said, there is no exposure. I work with other women. We work on training women to talk to the media and for public speaking, and not to be silenced or intimidated in public. It's very important. So you have to find the different ways in which you can empower women and you can equip them with the skills that are needed. And as I said, nothing takes the place of collective work. If you have, I worked on, and I keep telling our women's movement, always have lists of women. Whenever there's a vacancy, whenever there's a need, always present, have candidates available, have a list of women in all aspects, not just in the political arena. Not all women, like not all men, can be ministers or want to be in the cabinet. But there are others who want to be in the finance section, there are those who want to be in education, so always make sure you have your lists of qualified women and that you mentor them, you are with them, and you can present them and defend them when it comes, because intimidation is one weapon that is always used against particularly younger women. And they try to question all your credentials, your age, your experience, your education, your family, your standing, whatever. And then the whole issue of what they call honor and shame, always used against women, always, because your social behavior becomes part of your assessment, and you mustn't allow them to use such weapons against you. So the space, I know, is limited, restricted, and difficult. But you need allies, and you have allies, and you can work with them, and insist on affirmative action. Insist on it, but not as a symbolic gesture, just to say we have women here and there, and then these are women we control. And you have to be with them. In Miftah, I'm sure you know, we have support points where we not only do women get to elected positions, but also we stay with them to help them succeed. Because once they're in elected position, all the men around them try to show that they cannot deliver, so that the men will take over. So it's very important when the women are there, you help them get elected, that you also have to help them to make a difference and to succeed and to be with them. And I'm sure with determination, dedication, and refusal to succumb to these imposed patterns on you. The space is yours and you have to claim it. And I know sometimes you pay a heavy price. I've seen this among many women, but always have your allies with you. And know you're not alone.
Thank you. Very, very useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hanan. The next speaker, and I will appreciate if it's the question is not more than 3 minutes because time is running out. We have so many other people to speak. Manal Al Taleb, who has designed brilliantly inclusive and interactive campaigns to end child force and early marriage in Jordan. Manal?
Hello. Yes, hello everyone, and thank you, Karama, for giving us this opportunity to meet with such an inspiring women, not only in the Arab world, but also in the whole world. We are so proud of you, actually, and I'm so honored to meet you today, Dr. Hanan. And when I was informed about this meeting, I feel like there are many questions that it's like a bunch of questions to ask you about your achievements and experiences. But I'm really curious about your experience with US media. And as we all know that you were able to break through the US media, which was close to the Palestinian struggle. And I have read that in 1988, when you participated in a debate with the Americans in the ABC Nightline program show, and since then you became like the most favored Palestinian face in the US media. And you were able to break through the media and to change the perspectives of the American about the true story of the struggle in Palestine. And we all know that the American people, they were totally believing in the Israeli people lies. So could you tell us about this experience? How did that happen? And how could you break through the US media as an Arab woman leader?
Yeah, thank you for your question, because it is important to be able to break through, and it is not easy. The only way you can get through is not by sitting back, but it is by doing things. You have to do things, you have to claim your own space, you have to be active. That's why I believe in activism, as Hibaaq said. It's very important. The media don't come to you. You have to make them notice you. Now, if I weren't an activist, if I weren't constantly, I was in prison several times, I was beaten up several times, I was, in many ways, I was injured also, and I was constantly being detained and so on. So you make yourself felt. You make yourself part of the, not just the political discourse, but also part of the active resistance. And that's why when you have, again, the recognition of your own people with you, that's when they have to notice you. Because when you speak, you're not an individual voice. You're speaking on behalf of the people. You're speaking on behalf of resistance. You're speaking on behalf of activists. This is where you get your legitimacy. And in Palestine, it's very important. They always ask you, were you arrested? Were you detained? Did you do? This is, at least my generation, this is how you get your legitimacy, and that you resisted the occupation. Nowadays, you know, this has become less and less. But still, once you get the media's attention, you have to make sure that you speak straight to your audience, that you're honest, that you speak with integrity, that you know that you represent your people, that you have a message, and a message that resonates with everybody. It's not an individual, again, it's a collective message. It's a women's message. It's an oppressed people's message. It's a brown people's message. It's, I mean, you have so many people who can link up with you now. We have a solidarity network, for example, in the States, of women, of indigenous peoples, of Black peoples, Black Lives Matter, of brown people, of, you know, all the people who have felt oppression and discrimination in different ways. So you reach them, you speak to them, you speak to people's hearts and minds. Never be manipulative, because it's easy to see. Never lie, and never be silent. If you're challenged, you pick up that challenge and you challenge back and you speak the truth. That's how the American media get to see you. And it's not easy. Right now, for example, for many, many years, there were many networks, particularly, for example, CNN and so on, didn't want to have me. The Israelis protested every time I was on the screen. And they decided to boycott. I was not boycotted, but I was prevented. They would talk to anybody but me, because it was much easier to have a man who would yell and scream and who would speak in a different language, who would speak Arabic using English words. You know what I mean? And would not be able to reach the audience. So it's much easier to have those people, but to have women and to have young women and to have people who can reach hearts and minds, this is something that you have to prove. At one point they said, if you have a Palestinian, you should always have an Israeli. Then they said, if you have Hanan, you have to have an Israeli. But then they sent that Israelis do not debate her. So they ended up saying, well, there's nobody to debate her, so change Hanan. And I said, no, you asked me and I'm here and I will speak. If the Israelis don't have somebody who will stand up to me, that's their problem, it's not mine. So they use many ways of censorship and intimidation, and they use anti-Semitism, and they use whatever you want. The thing is to persist, to speak out. If they don't give you the mainstream screen, use now alternative media. There are so many, as you know, the social media, use your Twitter account, use your YouTube, make your films, get there. Make activities and occasions where you can break through. And then you have to challenge also. Challenge them when they have an Israeli and not a Palestinian. Challenge them when they have somebody, an American, talk about Palestine instead of Palestine talk about Palestine. And you have lots of people who are interested in that. And I'm always looking, of course, when I see a spokesperson, whether speaking in giving a talk or joining a seminar or whatever, I always try to push them forward. I always try to give them space to speak out. And it's very important. Make yourself heard and felt so that you will be there when we're looking for people to represent women or to represent Palestine or Jordan or whatever. So don't worry, don't be intimidated. You can do it. You can make it. And form relationships, always. Respect yourself if you want others to respect you. That's very important.
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, I think I wouldn't do justice if I don't acknowledge some of the incredible activists that I see on the screen. And we have silenced everyone except the youth, of course. So it's reverse discrimination. I see Randa Senior, and thank you, welcome. Randa, of course, from Palestine. I see Ghazlan, who is from Morocco. I see Huda from Jordan, and Amna, of course, and Lily.
Lily Fadi.
Where are you? I think Lily is wearing her pajamas. She put on
the camera. My camera isn't working, but I've been with you since the very beginning. يعني حنان عشراوي يعني مش معقول.
حبيبتي ليلي.
We can't miss you. We're proud of you, and we can't
go
miss
back
you.
Many years. Thank you, Randa. This is wonderful. Yeah, you have a whole history of Palestinian women.
That's right. And also international woman, an incredible reach. And Pat Mitchell is in the house.
Pat.
She's hiding. I don't see
Pat is an old friend also.
I think Ifat is there. So please show your faces. Then we can, I'm sure Pat has one or two questions to ask. We'll go ahead with the youth, and time is running out. Please keep 2 minutes questions or statement if you don't mind, unfortunately. The next speaker is Ayat Mneina, an incredible Canadian Libyan activists who founded the online Shabab Libya during the revolution.
Poor Libya
Ayat?
also.
Thank you,
Yes.
Hibaaq, and thank you, Dr. Hanan, for joining us today. I obviously agree with your sentiments about Libya. I wanted to speak to you. Our region is so different and our experiences are obviously different pockets. We're all in different places, but there is a commonality, you know, as women, as people who struggle. And I noticed that in your journey that you chose to become an independent at some point in time, correct?
Yes.
So with Libya, for my personal journey is that in 2011, we really all thought that we were standing for the same thing. And things soon became clear that, you know, on the second day that people had different motives. Obviously, you have a spectrum of political ideologies and things like that. So when you don't find yourself represented in that, I imagine you become an independent. Is that kind of the similar sentiment? I just wanted you to share your experience on kind of choosing to be an independent, what that could mean for building your own power, and how you kind of collaborate in that space. Libya doesn't really enjoy the safeties of, you know, a long history of politics, or, you know, there isn't even a rule of law today, and women are very, very vulnerable targets. So just kind of your 2 cents on that, if you don't mind.
Of course. And I think, you know, my heart goes out to Libya, to Syria, to Yemen, to Iraq, to all the Arab countries that are being targeted and in which proxy wars are being fought. And I know that women have, again, multiple injustices and face many dangers. So be strong and know that we're all thinking of you. And I wish there's something we can do, but we can share, as I said, a commonality of struggle, that injustices and oppression and violence and so on take different shapes. They target women, yes, but we have to be strong. And we have to, again, interact and benefit from each other's experiences. I tell you why I chose to be independent. I wasn't when I ran for the General Union of Palestine Students and when I started my activism. But then when I saw that factionalism and party allegiance became more important than the national commitment, then I began to feel that this is not the way things should be. It's like you see in the States now, you know, the GOP thinks that they're more important and they're misogynist and racist and everything you want. And it's important to be GOP rather than American. To us, of course, the different factions and so on were a means of struggle. They were all revolutionaries. I was part of the revolution. But at a certain point, I said, I want to be able to work with everybody. I don't want to be held back and defined within one faction or within one party. My loyalty is to Palestine. My loyalty is to the people of Palestine, and I will work with everybody who is committed. And I tell you, that's very difficult. You know this, because you are more exposed. You don't have the safety nets of parties and so on. You don't have the loyalties. In many cases, our parties or factions become sort of like tribal units where they have this type of tribal loyalty. So to be an independent means you step outside these structures, but you also, it means it puts a greater burden on you to be able to prove your value, your ability, your worth, the fact that you can make it even. I ran as an independent for the Legislative Council, and I ran as an independent for the Executive Committee. And the only time I accepted a position in government, a ministerial position, Minister of Higher Education and Research, was after I was elected. And I said, now I don't owe you my position. I owe it to my constituency, as I said earlier. So, in Libya, yes, it's extremely difficult and life is very dangerous, but at the same time, being an independent doesn't mean you've left the political arena or the national arena or patriotism. It means that you've put national patriotism. And I'm sure there are others. I mean, in Palestine, the majority do not belong to factions. And it's the factional rift is what weakens us. when people put their faction above the national cause. So it's important, again, to be within people who are independent enough to feel free to move politically, to talk to everyone, and to speak your mind. I know it's difficult. If you can't do it as a woman, then find the party or the faction that is closest to your mentality. Find progressives who understand and who recognize the value of women and women's intervention and women's work, and work with them and try to, in many ways, change their approach to make it closer to yours, if you find it difficult to be independent and on your own. But as I said, even as an independent, I always worked within a group. My pleasure.
Yes. Hi, Dr. Hanan. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
I'm just gonna jump into the questions straight away because I don't want to take a lot of your time. My first question is, as you know, with everything going on in Palestine in relation to CEDAW and the family protection law, from your experience, what do you think would be the next best step for women organizations and activists to take to in order to push the government to pass the law?
Yeah.
And my second question is a bit of a personal question. It's just, if you have the opportunity to go back in time and looking back at your career and your activism, if you had the opportunity to change something in your career or your activism, what would you change? And
oh, wow. Let's talk about CEDAW, because we ratified CEDAW, as you know, and there is quite a vicious pushback, and there are many who don't want us to include CEDAW within the domestic legislation, as you know. And this is really serious, because you cannot join, you cannot enter into a sort of global agreement on CEDAW or 1325 and then say, I don't want to implement them within my own legislation. So we have to keep challenging, first of all. Second, there is a pushback from very regressive, conservative, absolutist forces in Palestine. You have the Tahririyin. The other day, I was shocked. There was a demonstration with hundreds, with thousands of all these men wearing these disguises and abayas and so on and going around, فَلْيَسْقُطْ CEDAW. Do you know anything about CEDAW? Have you read CEDAW? Or is it that people are telling you this allows for abortion, or this clears lesbianism and homosexuality, or this allows for premarital sex? That's all they know. That's all they think of, what they've been told. And so when you are able to mobilize thousands of men, and some women, of course, and there's an Israeli army out there, and I don't see thousands of Tahririyin facing the Israeli army, but they feel quite comfortable attacking Palestinian women, accusing them of immorality, accusing them if they approve of CEDAW, and they're threatening and challenging women's organizations who are working on CEDAW. So yes, it's nowadays there is a regressive reactionary force against women, and there are, it's not just traditional men and attitudes, but there are also, religion is being used and abused to attack women and the women's movement. And this is not acceptable. So we are working together. There's a national committee, as you know, in order to make sure that the law passes. A couple of days ago, there was a meeting. Sorry. There was a meeting, a public meeting in which the executive committee, the PLO, and all factions declared their commitment. So if you do that, then you have to translate this verbal commitment into action. First, you have to challenge the government, because now You have the decrees rather than the legislative council that has been disbanded. So we are unable to legislate through the parliamentary procedure. It goes from the government to the president, who signs it and publishes it. And right now it is being held back because people, the government and the men, are afraid of challenging these traditional forces in our society. So what you have to do is to be able to put pressure on the government to constantly challenge them, because they did sign, they did ratify these, and therefore they have to fulfill their obligations. They cannot just make it lip service and then allow the laws to work against women and so on. It's like when we tried to change the penal code, as you know, when we challenged the mitigating circumstances and honor crimes and so on, or in a fit of anger, or it was only when all women and supporting men and enlightened men demonstrated and protested because of the case of the woman who was killed. I don't know, do you remember, Randa, her name? I'm sorry, I should never forget her name. That the president felt that he had to change, not have a new law, but at least change certain articles about mitigating circumstances and honor crimes and so on. And that's how we changed. But you have to constantly push to get that law. There are campaigns on websites, there are campaigns on Twitter, there are campaigns on Facebook, and there are lots of women's groups who are challenging this and who are demonstrating and who are putting pressure. I think we should constantly demand meetings with the cabinet. We should constantly challenge people in positions of authority and tell them you are abusing your power if you do not use it in order to protect the family, women, girls, young people, children from domestic violence. This is very important. And we have to exercise our voice and we have to intrude. You have to enter the arena and you have to challenge them in ways that would make them understand that they're not fulfilling their obligations. And yes, it cannot be sporadic and it cannot be once in a while. It has to be ongoing and it has to be accelerating anyway and incremental.
Thank you, Dr. Hanan. My internet is going in and out, so you have to excuse me. Sometimes I disappear and then reappear.
Yeah. Where are you?
I'm in Cairo, but it rains, so all the internet is really having challenges. Speaking of internet, before the internet goes off in Yemen, I would like to bring in Ola. Ola is an amazing social entrepreneur and researcher from Yemen and the co-founder of Shiba Youth Foundation for Development. Ola?
مرحبا، تسمعوني واضح؟
علا أو لا؟
تسمعوني تمام؟
سامعينك.
Hello, do you hear me clearly? In the beginning, thank you very much to Hibaaq and to Karama. Dr. Hanan, I'm very pleased to meet you. I have a young organization and we work on the youth and women empowerment to participate in the political arena. I believe that we are doing great work on the ground on track 3 of the peace process. However, and this is my question, I believe that the United Nations always plays a negative role in solving these conflicts or in their interventions. And this is from my perspective as a person who has experience in negotiations or in participating in debates. This is first of all what, and secondly, as youth and in the social media, we need to change what is happening. The United Nations is receiving thousands or millions of dollars on behalf of Yemen, and we are still in war, and the UN Special Envoy is constantly changing. A third question, which is relatively personal, I always noticed that women activists would be focused a lot on politics and would be watching the news constantly. So I believe that, but here in Yemen, there is reluctance from politics. So my question is, how can you balance between your political activism and your personal life? Of course, they are going to intimidate you and to push you away from political activism because there the decisions are made. They don't want women to make the decisions on their behalf. I should answer your question in Arabic, probably. Politics and the economy are the last bastion of patriotism or of patriarchalism. So when you have control of the politics and the economy, this means that you are controlling all aspects of life. And you, as a woman, you can establish associations and work on the ground, but they want you to stay away from the activities that takes away some of the men authority. So, in my opinion, women should be in all aspects of life. No area is closed in the face of women because all areas of work are for the human, for the citizen. So when we have the mentality of citizenship, both for men and women, this means that there is equality, meaning that no areas should be closed for men and some other areas should be exclusive for women, or some of them are exclusive for men. The decision making is the most important thing, in my opinion, and no proper decision can be made in any society if women are excluded, because that decision would be representing only half of society or men. This is very important. Regarding the United Nations, unfortunately, the United Nations is not a perfect organization. There are so many shortcomings and flaws. And we, as the Palestinians, we have struggled a lot of resolutions that are made but not implemented. None of the resolutions that the United Nations have taken against Israel since the 1948 until now have been implemented on the ground. No resolutions have been implemented. However, we continue to stick to the notion of a multi-party politics and also institutionalization, because this is a source of empowerment. Because United States and Israel, unfortunately, are beyond the scope of the rule of law and the international rule of law, and therefore they are beyond the scope of human rights. And that's why we need to continue challenging the world through the United Nations, despite the fact that we know that there are so many gaps and flaws within the United Nations, and that the powers to be are in control of the United Nations, and it requires reform. But this does not necessarily mean that we should not deal with the United Nations, and we understand that there are so many mercenaries, so to speak, who take positions within the United Nations, and we are seeing the constant change of special envoys to Yemen and to Iraq and to other countries where there are conflicts, but I call these proxy wars instead. In Yemen specifically, the Yemeni people are being subject to intentional killing, not only with the approval of the United States, but with the help of the United States and your neighboring countries, unfortunately. And this is not only repugnant, but it is actually shameful to see an Arab country being targeted and to see children and women and men being killed. This requires actual intervention, not only to have track one and track two of the peace process and to have negotiations. No, there should be an actual and effective intervention to cease fire, and for the forces that are killing the Yemenis should cease and desist. Those that are killing and destroying uh, all the all the foundation of life. We don't want only to mitigate. No, we want an actual intervention to stop this aggression. It is known who is providing the weapons and who is providing the money and who is bringing the fighter jets to bomb the innocent people. So this is the intervention that the United Nations does not do, even if it takes some resolutions, except through the Chapter 7, which means entering into an armed conflict. They have used it previously to justify the the Western wars waged against our region, but they haven't used Chapter 7 to protect us against the others. So all of the flaws of the United Nations are well known to all of us. However, we have to be a part of reforming the United Nations, and we have to be a part of demanding the human rights, demanding the international rule of law, and demanding or pluralism. And also we need to demand the United Nations to have those reforms in place. Empowering young women and men to participate politically. I'm very happy to see an organization on the ground established by yourself. Political empowerment can start by either elections or by challenging the political regime that works on excluding women from being in the political arena. Women and the youth, of course, because they consider politics to be exclusive for men, and especially for elder men, because the moment they sit on that chair, it's like they become power drunk. They don't want to get off of that chair or seat. They don't want to allow for others. So we need to challenge them, and we need to be parts of groups and within civil society organizations and maybe political parties. You should form your own political parties. There's no harm in that. But you are facing several challenges, very difficult challenges. And just like I told your colleague from Libya, our hearts and our minds goes to you because we understand the gravity of the challenge.
This has been an incredible lesson. Do you have time for one more?
Okay, one more. يلا ولا يهمك. You cannot be stingy with your time. Okay.
Menna from Egypt, because it's we're trying to make sure as many countries as possible. Menna.
Dr. Hanan, it's wonderful to have you with us today.
My pleasure, Menna.
And having to have this one-to-one conversation with you is like what Emna has said is a dream come true. I'm going to completely different topic, and I feel like you will actually like it a little bit more. Manal has mentioned that you managed to break into the US media, but what I think that you've also managed to break into the hearts and soul of everyone around the world throughout your books. Dr. Hanan Ashrawi, as the brilliant author who has affected me on a personal level, not possibly have this opportunity to talk to you in person without mentioning how your style of writing, only for the lack of using a better word, is exquisitely beautiful. Your use of language is masterful. You managed to give an authentic voice to the Palestinian reality by using a very unique narrative technique, which is closer to prose. That's why it was closer to everyone's hearts. So I will jump straight to my question. I know that you were inspired by your father throughout your writing journey, and he's the one who encouraged you to write more. My question is, when did you find your voice as a writer, or your sense as a writer? When did you know that you want to become the voice, you want to give the voice and amplify the voices of what's happening on the ground? And the second one, how did you manage to balance between writing and, of course, all of the brilliant books that came out? My personal favorite is This Side of Peace. I'm sorry, I'll go back to the question. How did you manage to balance between writing and the hectic pace of international negotiations?
Well, you have to be able to manage everything all at once. Isn't this something we say about women? That we can multitask. We are not one-track minded and we do one thing and that's enough. We are always challenged to do many things. Well, listen, writing has always been part of my life. And as you know, I studied, my PhD is in medieval literature, and I did my dissertation also in comparative literature. Edward Said was one of my readers on my dissertation. So I've always loved language. I've always loved literature. And you know, had I had the freedom to choose, I would prefer to be in academics, you know, and I would prefer to have the time to write. But as I said, you have to be an activist. You have to be, you have to challenge the injustices, the multiple injustices you are facing. So to me, writing is not a choice in the same way as activism is not a choice. It's something that you do. And because writing takes a lot, and it takes training. I mean, you're not just born, you don't just decide to write. You have to be able to deal with the language in ways that you do it justice, because of course it's an expression of a mental process. If you can't think, you can't write. Language is again, not just a tool of communication, it's a tool of raising awareness. It's a tool of challenging reality and creating realities. So I love to write, frankly, and if I had more time, I would write some more. Many people tell me, stop your political work and just sit back and do some more writing. So sometimes I vent by writing tweets on my Twitter. I started one only when Trump was beginning to make policies on Twitter. And I thought somebody has to do something about this. So I decided to tweet in English. Some people get upset. So once in a while I tweet in Arabic to tell them, no, I love my language. I love Arabic too. And I love Arabic grammar. People don't understand. To me, Arabic grammar is a system of thought and logic and math. I really like it. And I went through Twitter sometimes. But I certainly used to write poetry and short stories and things like that. I will once I resign or retire from the PLO executive, which I hope to do as soon as I can, I will be able to have more time to write. And it's important to be able to use language. But as I said, not in a manipulative and fake way. You use language to reach others. You use language with the truth. You express your truth. You use it with courage and not as a way of circumventing the truth or hiding it or whatever. So it's, I mean, you know, I'm sure you also have a love of language. I could tell this when you wrote, love of literature and the ability to express yourself. This is very important. And having been an academic and a teacher for a long time, the power of persuasion is very important. Peitho is the goddess of persuasion in Greek, in classical Greek, you know, and she was known, she's a woman, of course, and she was known as the most powerful goddess, because the power of persuasion can influence, can change people's minds, can change reality. So use your power of persuasion as a woman, use your language, use your ability to present coherent and convincing, not just arguments, but also creativity in ways that would reach others. And that's why I said, never lie, never manipulate, and just speak from the heart and the mind, and you will get there. And I think the media and the audience recognize that. And they would like to feel respected, not insulted by somebody who's either speaking down to them or who's trying to deceive them or hide the truth from them. Thanks, Menna.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Dr. Hanan has been lesson and lesson. I think next time we are going to a whole day or 2 days or 10 years, but I think every woman should really hear you. This has been a teaching, honest to God, you know, class for us. And I have never been in any place where celebrating anything where I just wanted it to go on and on and on. So Dr. Hanan, thank you so much. You really made this time and, you know, your schedule and that's going on in your life. So thank you for very inspirational for us.
Thank you, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity. I think, you know, meeting so many wonderful and promising young women is marvelous. So let me tell everybody how much I enjoyed meeting you. Let's stay. Hibaaq, if you hear me, keep us connected, because I would love to stay in touch with all these wonderful young women. And maybe we can do something together. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. All the more power. Thank you.